Well, spring is just around the corner. Things are warming up weather-wise around the country, and the NFL calendar and the rumor mill is also heating up as teams, media members, and college prospects are gathering in Indianapolis for the 2025 Scouting Combine. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He is John Sheeran. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. John playing with a little bit of a, I don't know what you want to call it, you're hurting a little bit from your big weekend out in the desert this last weekend.
Let's just call it what it is. It's an extended hangover. Like there's no need to sugarcoat this. You know, I'm not old. I feel old at the moment, but had a lot of fun over the weekend. So you know, we'll take the bad with the good.
Yeah, I mean that's a great destination for a bachelor party. Highlight the trip that is relatively safe to share from your time in the desert, my friend. I think you didn't get golf in, right? Is what you were saying to me.
We did not get golf in. We
okay.
went to Top Golf as like kind of a pivot because we originally wanted to go like mini golfer or something like that, but it was getting pretty hot there, so we offered some shade. No, one of the days we were there, I'd never been in a self-driving car, but they have these things out there. I don't know if they're in California. It's called Waymo. And it was slightly cheaper than like an Uber, but yeah, there was no driver and it was incredibly safe. I was very surprised at how smooth it was. Like there's obviously cameras all over the car on the outside, but there was like one turn where like maybe you thought it was going to hit the curb and anything, but you know, the groom to be really wanted to try it. And I'm like, you know what? They don't have these in Ohio. I don't know when they're ever going to come to Ohio. I've never been in a self-driving car before, but you know, there's nothing but desert out here. I highly doubt we're going to crash into something, you know, too hard or anything like that. So we tried it out and it was fun. That's the safest thing I'll be able to share, I think.
Well, yeah. I mean, speaking of safety, that was probably safer than some of the flying excursions, unfortunately, that people are taking of late. So, I mean, if you made
very fortunate that there was nothing along those lines.
There you go. Yeah. There you go. Do you want to shout out the airline that got you there and back? Safely?
Yeah, I guess shout out Delta. I've been a customer for almost 30 years now, racking up Sky Miles. A lot of my friends use Frontier because it was cheaper, but like, guys, I don't care if it's $4,000. Give me a flight that I know is gonna get me from point A to point B.
Yeah, I mean, you got if it's Frontier or Spirit. No offense, Frontier or Spirit, but I have flown both, and man, there's just zero frills on those flights. And anyway, but Delta, big hub out your way, right? That's the Covington Airport out there. That's their big hub. But at any rate, glad you made it back. Glad you had fun. And we are going to talk about some Bengals. We're going to talk about some sight, sounds, and news from the NFL Combine, largely courtesy of one Duke Tobin, who took the podium on Tuesday and shared quite a few nuggets, some encouraging, some kind of classic Duke speak, and some other things with that. So we'll talk about that. We've got a prospect profile to share with you. Grades are out on franchises per the NFLPA. Some mixed marks for the Cincinnati Bengals, to say the least. And then I got something else to kind of share towards the end of the show too. Just some added news and notes that I think people will find enjoyment out of. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, though, part of the Believe, BLEAV, National Podcast Network and the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. Our show, along with Talking Football with Bengal Jim and Friends, Matt and Willie Know Ball with the coach Matt Minnick and Willie Lutz, and 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin, all on the channel for you. Hopefully you enjoyed all of the stuff we were bringing you in the regular season, and now we're going to gear things back up with free agency around the corner and the draft right around the corner too. So you got to subscribe through your favorite audio streamer, whether that is iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all the major ones. The Believe in Cincy podcast channel, you got to resubscribe to that feed. Leave us a review, hopefully a good one if you don't mind. That would help us out. And of course, if you like the video side of things, we stream on Cincy Jungle's Facebook page, so you got to be a member there, along with some other Twitter accounts. And all of our stuff is on our YouTube channel as well, the Orange and Black Insider. Pretty easy, youtube.com at @BengalsOBI, or you can subscribe to that underneath John's side of the screen there. There is a show icon. Click that, do the subscribe, the bell, the thumbs up, all the fun things that we make you, all the hoops we make you jump through. And of course, this show, along with the others on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel, brought to you in part by FOCO, the fans only company. They got cool bobbleheads, limited edition Bengals stuff. So go check out all the stuff that they have over at FOCO. All right. And seeing some people from a couple of different modes of watching, saying hello to us. Hello to you all. Let's kick it off, John. I don't know. Were you encouraged, I guess, by some of the things Duke Tobin said? I mean, it sounded like there was some positivity and some high levels of effort being made on the Bengals end to get the deals done for their big 3 stars. Tobin said he wants T Higgins on his team. They're trying to get things done with Trey Hendrickson. And of course, it sounds like they're going to, I mean, all the reports are saying more or less that he said that they are going to make Jamar Chase the highest paid non-quarterback in the league at this point.
Right before he got up on the stage, on the podium, whatever, like I tweeted out like, oh, like we value our core players and we intend to keep our core players, which is like the most Duke Tobin type response I could have possibly matched. Like that was my expectation, because whenever he steps up to a microphone, he keeps everything very close to the vest. He is a product of who the Bengals are as an organization. These people love to posture. They don't like to give up any ounce of leverage. They don't like to say anything with anything worth of substance, if you will. So when he kind of began, not just with the whole spiel of like, oh, we were disappointed in last season, like yada, yada, yada. Like, you know, obviously you missed the playoffs, so you're disappointed. It just sounded like it's still very monotone, but there was more of a punch in his words, and using the words optimism, I think multiple times, referencing the fact that not only, you know, maybe this could work out, maybe you could fit these guys all in here, which was kind of the sentiment that we got when he was speaking down at the Senior Bowl. But there's optimism that you can get this done, and it is possible, and that the money is there, the cap health is there in his terms, right? Because we could talk all day about what that actually means in terms of the salary cap, but not only keeping the big 3 that we're calling them, but also adding to the team. It's not just going to be about, you know, maybe we want to keep these guys, but maybe we can get it done. No, it's almost like the expectation is like we plan on getting this done, and there is optimism of doing that. And on top of that, adding to the rest of the team. Whereas these contracts, while are huge and they're going to be big, they're going to take up a lot of space. That's undeniable. But there's going to be still room to upgrade the rest of the team, because that he just came off as someone who was very unsatisfied with what the roster turned into last year, in a conjunction with, you know, all the moves that they made and all the injuries that they suffered. So he checked, I think, a lot of boxes from my perspective. It was a lot better, more enthusiastic, with conviction, if you will, than I expected. And I think what really, you know, put the cherry on top was he was asked about, you know, Joe Burrow, you know, lobbying him and the front office for the last 2 months. And he basically said, I'm paraphrasing here, but I agree with everything that he says. Like, I want these deals done. I want to get them done. Like, whatever he wants, I want. And that was like the first time I ever heard him kind of speak from a sense of where he doesn't have control. It's like, I hope that this happens. Like, I want this to happen. And it's not just like, oh, like we'll see if we get it done or everything like that. It almost like he was sending the same message that Burrow has been sending. And I don't know if that was his way of basically like saying to the front office, because we have to remember this guy is a de facto general manager. He doesn't officially have that power, doesn't officially have the power that, you know, Katie and Troy and Mike obviously have. It almost sounded like he was expressing some frustration that he went through, you know, these past 2 off seasons with these failed negotiations, because he doesn't necessarily have that power to get these things done. And he was just kind of like joining arms with Burrow a little bit. So half of it was there was conviction and optimism that this is the plan and we expect to fulfill it, with also being like, I want to get this done, and speaking from a place where he doesn't sound like he's in complete control of it, which was extremely rare, at least from my perspective, of hearing this guy talk for years and years. It always ends up sounding the same, but this time it did sound a little bit different.
I'm largely with you on that. In that, I did find optimism in a lot of things that he said and his approach in saying it, and I found optimism that he fully recognizes the importance of those players and them staying in Cincinnati. I also go back to what you and I have been talking about on the last few episodes, where these Radio Row interviews with Joe Burrow and others, and a little bit of Duke Tobin too, kind of saying, yeah, like you said, yeah, he is technically front office, but this is laying it at ownership's feet. It is laying all of the responsibility. It's a little, I hate to put it this way, it's a little bit of passing the buck. I mean, it's kind of like, hey, we know what we want to do. We know what we have to do in terms of securing these players long-term. We want to get it done. The quote with Trey Hendrickson, there was some positivity. We've been talking, but we're not there yet, I think was a quote that he said. Obviously, being there would be ink to paper. But so that seems a little bit further apart than maybe some of the other situations, namely Jamar Chase. That one kind of seems like a foregone conclusion at this point. It's just hammering out all the details and getting that one done. It's the other two that are obviously more tricky. But again, he kind of echoed a little bit of what we heard on Radio Row and right after the season, in that, yeah, we want to get this done. We recognize it, so let's do it. And like you said, maybe he's not as big of a part of that process, at least with the dollars being committed as ownership. And so now it's a bunch of the big figureheads of the team, the franchise quarterback, the de facto GM, kind of saying, well, let's work to get these done.
Yeah, there was a theme, I think, with how everyone kind of spoke, and Tobin kind of talked about this later with Al Golden. The word alignment came up a lot, and I think he wanted to make sure that he was aligned on record with his quarterback, that the head coach was also aligned with all this. And it's just been a constant 2-month barrage of pressure on the ownership group to get this done, because everyone is in agreement that it should be done. It's not a matter of like, yeah, we would like to get this stuff done. No, like these are priorities and they need to be handled, and they need to be handled in an expedited fashion. That was another thing that I think kind of stood out as well, because it's one thing that, you could feasibly sign these deals by like July 15th. If you were to use the tag on T Higgins, you have until July 15th to get that done. You can obviously sign Jamar and Trey whenever you want, but the longer that you wait, the more muddy the waters get in terms of your financial outlook with how to build out the rest of the team. And that was also something that he mentioned multiple times. The sooner we get this done, the sooner we'll be able to have clarity on where else we need to address the rest of the roster. And that is 100% true. Like, they should get at least 2 of these deals done. They should, I'm not saying they will, but they should get at least 2 of these deals done before the beginning of free agency. And obviously, with T being scheduled to hit free agency if they don't use the tag, he naturally just comes first along that timeline, and everything is set pretty much with Jamar Chase and the market there. So again, like, you can just stick to your guns about who Duke Tobin is and what he's always been and how he's always communicated things. I completely understand that. There's a track record here that is well established, and people who are naturally pessimistic are going to stay pessimistic. This is not going to move you necessarily. I'm just saying that from my point of view, I've never heard this man say anything that could potentially bite him in the butt. And this was basically 30 minutes of saying, if we don't get this done, it is a failure. This is the expectation. This is the plan. They have to execute it, because they left themselves basically no outs if things go sideways. And I thought that was, again, it's the most, not the most un-Bengals thing I've ever seen, but it's up there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just kind of passing it along like, hey, let's get this done, management, ownership, etc. It's funny what one player's tweet of a blue cap emoji does to a fan base and does to the masses at large. T Higgins, in case you missed it, tweeted out a blue cap emoji, single emoji, and that was at, I believe, last night / late afternoon yesterday. People cryptically read that might have been in response to some of the comments of Duke Tobin. That has neither been confirmed nor denied, but it's it's funny how one tweet of one emoji can set aflame the Bengals masses.
it's very important to understand that this is still a negotiation. And I mean, it's pretty clear that he was saying that at least something along what Duke Tobin said he doesn't agree with, or
so you do think that was a response, not just something else he was tweeting out. You think that was
it's very likely that it was directed there. Like
okay.
I'm not, obviously nothing is 100%, and T has been known to kind of just be a troll a little bit because everyone just takes what he says as 100% fact. If we're gonna base the assumption that it was based around something that Duke said, we don't know exactly what he was referring to with what he said. It could have been anything. It could have been something about Jamar Chase. It could have been something about Trey Hendrickson. It could have been any number of things that he said about T Higgins. It doesn't mean for 100% fact that there haven't been some productive conversations with him. And it doesn't mean that the Bengals still don't feel optimistic that they can get something done. It's still the opinion that if they are to use the tag, it's to extend the window to negotiate a long-term deal. And again, these deals don't come together normally in February. Khalil Shakir, the deal that he signed is 4 years, $60 million. Again, that's more of the exception to the rule. Whereas guys like T Higgins who get the tag, they get extended right before free agency, and in those couple days after the tag has to be applied. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer into the month of March. There was Antoine Winfield Jr., who was signed in the middle of May after he got the tag. So that is the Bengals' plan, and the negotiation is still ongoing. So there's naturally going to be, I think, still some push and pull from both sides. And maybe that was T kind of saying that, hey, you know, maybe overall what you're saying has some weight to it, but there's still some things that I don't fully agree with. Maybe some things that you're not being completely 100% honest about. It's silly to speculate anything further than that, but this is still an ongoing negotiation, and T doesn't want to give up anything more than what he has to. And it's not like this deal is going to come together during the show. I still think that the tag will be applied. I think that's still the belief amongst everyone who's reporting this. It's going to be applied at the end of the window, and then they're going to use that 7-8 day window before free agency to really hammer something home.
And it is, you bring up a really good point about echoing the sentiment of we need to figure out these deals quickly because we need to figure out how the rest of the offseason is going to look like. How many dollars are we going to commit to outside free agency if we sign most or all of these guys to extensions? What are our draft plans if we lose one or some of these guys? And obviously, if you're looking, let's just say for the sake of argument, I'm kicking the can way down the road here, but let's just say for the sake of argument, you can't get a long-term deal done with T. It turns into a situation like we talked about, the structuring of the reported non-exclusive franchise tag, which would net the Bengals 2 first-round picks in that event. And then let's just say you can't get a long-term deal done with Trey Hendrickson, and you're looking to deal him before the draft to get picks in this year's class. You're looking at potentially upwards of 4 or so premium picks at that point. And then you really got to readdress things in the draft. Maybe even make another player trade for somebody else out there that you feel that you can leverage those picks for. Again, I'm way jumping the shark here, but these are all things that need to be figured out in the wake of these, if these contracts get done or if they don't get done.
And they did it to themselves. Like most of the stuff should have been ironed out by now in the past couple of years. But again, I do think that it's one thing for Joe Burrow, who hates talking to the media. He would rather just sit at home and play video games all day and order food. It's one thing for him to go on a press tour and basically bang the table to get these things done and put pressure, like you said, kind, polite pressure on the team. It's another thing when you have the figurehead of the organization and the personnel decision-making department kind of relaying the same messages. And I really can't put my finger on exactly what the purpose was. Either he is saying these things with conviction and optimism because of his true belief of the situations, or he went off script and he's putting pressure on the people above him on the organizational chart. I don't know. None of us do know. None of us are going to know until all these things happen. But again, I think it's fair to say that what he said and the manner of the things that he said are at least a little bit surprising and went beyond what we all expected him to say, which is basically nothing at all with the same monotone voice.
The other element of, getting these deals done early too, there was, speculation, rumors, and even just kind of reading through the smoke and different comments that players were talking about in the late portions of last summer. And, even bleeding back into the DJ Reader leaving, Jesse Bates leaving type of situations where this maybe was a little bit of a dark cloud in terms of not getting a long-term deal done with these three guys last year who all expressed the desire to do so, you don't really want, even if this goes a little longer than, the draft, et cetera, you really don't want this going on again into summer and heading into training camp and having that, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, that aura, that cloud, whatever, hanging in the locker room of here's another offseason where this team just didn't get it, didn't pay their stars again, didn't get the ink to the paper. It's kind of a PR move as well in that regard with their own players, not only with the fan base, national media, everyone else, but also within their own locker room.
Yeah, it's something we've kind of touched on. If you want to erase the narrative that your team just craps the bed in the first month of the season, you can't have those problems reappear again and kind of lead to the same result. Just having all the stuff figured out, like 99% of the rest of the NFL does, it's the standard. And I think there's been a lot that's happened in the past year that really seems to have kind of penetrated the minds of these people, and whether or not they actually act on it is another thing, but it's definitely in their head. And I think all the talk about, oh, this is impossible, like you guys can't actually do this, this is such a tall task, like obviously it is a tall task, but I think maybe part of it was saying like, hey, like this is the expectation, this is what we expect to do. Maybe they did hear some of the noise. Whether, again, it feels like every time that we say stuff like that, we have to leave with the caveat that it still has to happen, or else no one is going to take us seriously.
And that this is the Bengals, yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But again, like we're just speaking based off of our experiences covering this team and our expectations and everything that kind of goes in with that. We're being honest here, and I think honestly, there are some real takeaways to take from this.
There were some real takeaways, some positive, some remain to be seen, and we will obviously be covering that on this show on cincyjungle.com and A to Z sports.com. By the way, that beautiful picture of Duke Tobin that we were sharing with you in that segment was courtesy of an article from John Sheeran on A to Z sports.com. So thanks, John, for letting us plagiarize that picture for the show. Appreciate that, my friend. That being said, I don't know if this was a PR hit or if this kind of was the same old, or to be expected, or maybe even again a little bit of optimism because of some creep ups in some rankings. But the NFLPA did bring out their annual franchise report cards, and the Bengals received mixed marks, namely really poor grades in family engagement and nutrition. I think it was F and F minus, or I mean, both were Fs. Doesn't really matter. So they were utterly failing in those regards. They crept up in some other areas. I mean, you could take some stock in this, obviously, because this is a poll from the players, right? I mean, they give their grades on this. Interestingly, especially when you have teams that and players on your team that have suffered, ligament tears somewhat frequently, the soft muscle tissue stuff. You could tie that loosely into nutrition, right? I mean, some of that stuff, you could tie some of that stuff into that. And the Bengals were lobbying for this one specific nutritionist to stay on as a full-time employee. Apparently she is only allowed in the facility 2 days a week, that sort of thing. And both she and her name escapes me at the moment. I apologize, but Lindsay, yeah. I was going to say Ashley, but yeah, it was Lindsay. She and the players are advocating for her to stick around. So I'm interested to see if that ends up taking place, particularly with the Bengals and how they may respond to this report card. In the past, they've kind of not responded well, but they have increased marks for the locker room facilities and other, they increased some of those, which was great. And that had to do with the renovations. But your overall impressions of this report card with the Bengals, as their team, their players kind of made their voices heard, so to speak, in various areas of the team.
Yeah, I remember when they built the locker room, it was the NFLPA that like released something like, oh, this is awesome, and this will probably be reflected in next year's report card, because they got a D+ with locker room quality this time last year, and this was after they officially broke ground on the new locker room, and now it's state of the art, right? You got like an A+ or anything like that. So Zach, I think, got an A. He's always gotten A's. I think players just love his style of coaching and management. Team travel, I think, improved from like a C to an A-. So I guess shout out Delta. That's what they use at a CVG. Delta's getting free promo out here. I wasn't expecting that, but I don't think they
let's get them a sponsor the show, Delta. Let's go.
but yeah, like, so last year the main focus was just improving the locker room, which, I mean, it's a basic fundamental need for a team. Nothing's more fundamental in terms of human needs than food. um I'm interested in the context here, because I don't think they're just serving them just slop out of a garbage can, even though that's what maybe an F would look like in your mind. I really do think it had to do with the lack of like a true consistent dieting plan compared to the rest of the league. And maybe part of it was, hey, like, let's get Lindsay in here full time so that she can help us eat better and fuel our bodies better so that we're better ready to play. I don't think it's a huge deal for select players on the team. I know Joe Burrow has a personal chef. I don't think he's necessarily worried about the cafeteria food at Paycor. Maybe that's the case for other players who make quite a chunk of change. My big thing, Anthony, the Bengals are the only team. They've done these report cards for 3 years in a row. The Bengals are the only team with an F or worse. So they had an F minus this year in treatment of families all 3 years. The Jaguars were on there twice in 2 of the 3 years. The Commanders have been on 2 of the 3 years, but they improved massively with new ownership. Treatment of families is pretty abhorrent, at least in this grade, and I really don't understand how there isn't more of an initiative to improve this. It seems like a lot of it has to do with the lack of amenities. There's no daycare center for their kids. There's no designated area for, I think, families to go in post game. It just seems like they're so far behind compared to other teams in the league, and this has been the most consistent issue for them. So if we're going by this trend of fixing and focusing and honing in on one thing a year, I would say that this is the thing that deserves most of their attention, because you can hire Lindsay full time, and I think you could improve that grade a little bit. This is the area I think that actually needs some real work, and I really don't think it's going to take much at all.
Yeah, going back to the cafeteria thing and food, I think part of that, the gripes seem to be, like you said, kind of accessibility of what they're looking for. I find it so ironic that the family thing is so poorly graded, because it's run by a family. It's run by a tight-knit family that hires each other and works in the front office. And the patriarch of this organization is on the Mount Rushmore of the NFL and Paul Brown. And so you go, why wouldn't that be kind of one of your most paramount priorities? And the other thing that worries me about this, John, is, I don't know exactly how much stock other players look so deeply into this, but if you're an outside free agent being courted by the Cincinnati Bengals and you have a family and you have to move your family from state to state, if you look at that, that's a problem. I mean, that's something that dings you potentially in outside free agency if you are vying for a player with a number of other teams and they go, well, I mean, where's your daycare? Who's taking care of my kids? Where does my family go before a game, after a game? And, do they get a little bit of red carpet treatment during those processes? That to me just blows my mind that this is a consistent issue, because this is a family run organization and they just have not addressed it.
I do agree. I think that these surveys are very useful. It brings attention to some of these things. It reminds you that while these franchises are worth billions, this is still some greed, just natural with billionaires, and that's just pretty standard across the board in the United States. But to answer like the question of like, is this really going to impact free agency? Money's still king, right? Like they've been able to lure in free agents in these past few years without some of these things before they even made some of these concessions and these upgrades. How much are you paying me? I can afford to hire a babysitter if you guys are putting an extra $1 or $2 in my signing bonus. Like that's always going to be the number one thing. But I do think that this is a nice wake up call on a yearly basis for these teams to say like, hey, we can make some small improvements here if we're getting some bad press about this.
The other thing that I think is pretty, I mean, I guess I'm going back a little bit too, going back to the nutrition thing. I mean, I don't know how much this ties into it, but it does bring back the old Jonathan Joseph comments and Hushmanzada when he was on our show just this last fall about the Gatorade stuff and they didn't have all that stuff stocked. And I do think, yes, there's a legitimate criticism of Mike Brown and the family of, hey, how aren't you just doing things top notch? But I do think if you look at it from a business owner perspective, sometimes looking at these things as a business owner, maybe you're kind of, and especially with a team that has more limited internal resources, scouts, et cetera, you're kind of hyper focusing on a handful of areas, and some of these things get overlooked, and you don't really, as a business owner, you got a lot of responsibilities, a lot of people you're overseeing. You don't really realize, wow, this is what our employees want. This is what they are missing. This is where we are failing them. So I think in a way that I hold some optimism because they've revamped the locker room in such a big way in a short period of time. Maybe this is just another element that, it may take a year or two, but it is something that calls attention, that needs attention to the Bengals, where they haven't really thought about it. But to your point, like you said, this is now 3 years running. You probably want to address the thing.
100%. I just wanted to ask or answer a question that we got in the comments from Bengals fandom. Why aren't these report cards graded during the season with the actual 53-man roster? These answers are surveyed between August and November. So you are talking about players who actually made the team. They come out in the beginning of the offseason. So, teams actually get time to do this. But obviously, Mike Brown is still the president here, and he's still got the name and is going to get the blame for a lot of this stuff. But I was thinking about it earlier, and I'm like, I don't think it's never been, of my opinion, that Mike Brown doesn't care about players. Everyone that we've interviewed, Anthony, that has talked about Mike Brown, and I think it goes beyond just us. I think the only person that said anything bad about Mike Brown as someone who cares about players is Carson Palmer. And obviously he had his own reasons to go on, take that type of route. I don't think this is Mike Brown saying, I hate your families at all. I think this is just frugality that leaks throughout the team. But at risk of defending Mike Brown, who is not highly revered in the sports ownership hierarchy, I've never heard anything that has ever been an indictment on who Mike Brown is as a person, how much he cares for his players. I've talked to him a couple of times, and I've never gotten that impression. So unfortunately, he's the figurehead of it all, but I don't think these problems are just him being, a curmudgeon and an evil person.
No, I agree with that. I mean, you could see that with all the reclamation projects that he took on, especially with Marvin Lewis and those guys. If you talk to Pac-Man Jones, he always is still a big Mike Brown guy for the chances he gave him. I know Chris Henry towards the end of his life and career was also, he was pretty appreciative of that. So I don't believe that 1 second. I don't really believe either when they go, oh, that's Mike Brown to a T. He just doesn't want to win. Mike Brown wants to win. Mike Brown wants a championship football team. I just don't know that he knows the hows as much as his father. It's the way to get there. And I think he did adopt many ways that his father operated teams, but it just does not work in modern day NFL. You cannot operate in a lot of those ways. So I don't, like you, I think he does care a lot about his players. I think he does care about winning. It's the hows and the whys that I think are the problems. So, I am reminded a little bit when we had Takeo Spikes on a while ago on our show. He talked about his frustration and, where the Bengals were towards the end of his career and not wanting to stick around with Marvin Lewis. But I still don't think that was hey, they don't care about me. They were willing to pay him. They wanted him to stick around and play. So like you said, I don't hear a lot of, there are a lot of criticisms, many of them founded of Mike Brown. I don't think it's a lack of passion for or compassion for players or a lack of passion for winning. Again, it's just the way he wants to get there is not really the way that many other teams operate and or successful teams operate.
100%. And, these things, these grades specifically aren't going to really impact his legacy, but, the next generation, the Blackburns, these are problems that they have to deal with. And if they want to get ahead of the curve and, be better than, the person that came before them, then these are things that should still be priorities in terms of just the overall culture of the building.
Yeah. So the Bengals get mixed marks on the NFLPA 2025 franchise report. And I just want to tie a bow on the combine and this sort of thing. We didn't really talk too much about Zack Taylor because a lot of the things were still pretty similar to Duke Tobin. I did want to bring up one point and get your thoughts on it, John. One of the things he did say was, basically, I forget who it was, maybe Kelsey Conway or somebody asked him about the struggles in the beginning of the season. and how it's a continued problem. And he basically outright said, we are looking at rehashing our approach. And I'm paraphrasing, of course, but we are looking at how we do things in spring and summer, in the offseason program, the training program, the practices. It sounds like an overhaul of some sort is going to be done.
Yeah, I think that was kind of said along the same lines by both Al Golden and Jerry Montgomery when they first got here. I remember it was Montgomery who was saying that how he and Scott Peters last year with the Patriots, they kind of hit the ground running in the spring and got, I think, a little bit more physical than what the Bengals typically are. Al Golden has been nothing but praised for how he gets players up to speed from the very moment that he gets his hands on them. Tobin kind of mentioned that he's very hands-on in that approach, and that was also, I think, something else that he mentioned. I mentioned alignment, just being aligned with player vision and what their roles are going to be, and making sure that there's a good idea about who this guy is. And I think that all kind of starts in the offseason and hitting the ground running in spring practices, OTAs, offseason workouts, just so that there's clarity about who am I on this team, what is my role. That leads to better practices. It leads to quicker practices, so that by the time training camp comes around, you're even further ahead than I think where they've been in years past. But yeah, they can't just do nothing. They can't just run back the same plan and expect different results and to get lucky. I think part of bringing in at least 7 new coaches on the staff, all the mindset of, hey, like let's be a little bit more intense in the beginning here, so that we can make sure that by the time September comes around, it feels like November. We're not getting any sound from you.
Wanted to tie a bow on combine stuff and talk about what Duke said, a little bit of what Zach said, and of course that report card that came out regarding the Cincinnati Bengals. We're going to start not quite closing things up, but we've got a couple more things to get to. Want to remind you to get this show, the Orange and Black Insider, part of the Believe Podcast Network and the Believe in Cincy Podcast channel. That's BLEAV. Clever how they did that. Believe in Cincy is the podcast channel where you can get our show and a number of other great ones. Do that and subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the Cincy Jungle Facebook page. Do all the things so you can get our show and the others on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel, brought to you in part by FOCO, the fans only company. You can still pre-order your dual Jamar Chase and Carl Pickens Rookie of the Year bobblehead, which is a limited edition of 75. So we'll have that link in our description in the show, and of course on the post on Cincy Jungle there'll be a link there too. So check that out. We're going to move on and do another prospect profile. I wanted to do a free agent profile, but I feel like John, and just to catch you all up, John did a great breakdown, and we've separated these segments on our YouTube channel as well. There will be some posts coming up on Cincy Jungle, also showing these with the media, the multimedia, video, audio, everything for the shows that these were on. But you're repping the hat this week. The UC guard, Luke Kandra, who looks like a promising, probably early day 3 prospect and a guy who has starter potential, definitely. We also, who else did we do? We did Cam Scadaboo. I called him Scadabo, but I did Scadaboo. And who was the other one we did so far, John?
I think Scadaboo was the first.
Yeah, so we've done a few. But those are all archived on our YouTube channel, so go check those out. I think there was one more that I'm omitting at this point right now. But regardless, we've got another one. And this one, if you go back about a month or so when the Bengals season ended, John and I ran through a list of players we were just kind of briefly keeping an eye on as they linked to the Bengals, whether that was positional need, talent, various rounds of the draft. And Scadaboo was one of them. And this player is one of them, John. And he is a guy that I know a lot of people like. A lot of people are hoping that he is the guy at number 17. That is Ole Miss defensive lineman Walter Nolan, a versatile guy, a guy who's got a really athletic build. At the combine this week, he mentioned that he kind of idolizes Aaron Donald, but I don't really see Aaron Donald with this guy so much, just because the size difference. And Aaron Donald was between 280, 290, and he was maybe 6'1", something like that. This guy is 6'3" and above 300. So he's a bigger guy, but he uses his body well. He uses his hands well. He's an exciting player. I don't think the ceiling is an Aaron Donald, even though that's kind of where some of these big guys have been drafted. Who was it? Kalijah Cansey, wasn't he drafted, mid-late first round and that sort of thing? A little bit of a different player, but a guy I think that will excite a lot of Bengals fans. I'm going to pull up a video of him here, talk about some stats and that sort of thing. A guy I just like a lot for a variety of reasons, John. I think he's got high potential. I think he brings a position of, obviously a position of need for the Cincinnati Bengals. As I mentioned, he's about 6'3", 305 is what, some of his listed weight is. He's a guy who's just 21. He will turn 22 in the season, I believe. And, just solid build, solid tape. I don't know that he's going to be, Hall of Fame type potential like an Aaron Donald, but I think he can be a very, very nice player for a long time in the NFL, especially if you have a guy around him like a Trey Hendrickson. And we'll look at some clips in just a minute here. But last year, 6.5 sacks, 48 total tackles, 14 tackles for loss, 3 passes defended, and 2 fumble recoveries. Not the Carlos Dunlap guy that knocks down a ton of passes every year, but I mean, he'll get you one every once in a while. But he's just a penetrator guy. He's a guy that sheds blocks really well. And we'll try and, I've slowed some of these down so you can kind of check out some of the things here. But I think a guy that Bengals fans would be very, very excited about. So you look here, he just kind of gets lost in the wash, but makes his way, tackle for loss. I don't know if that was an actual forced fumble. I don't think it was there. But here he is again. You'll see him kind of come across, get lost in a lot of blocks, and still make the tackle for loss there. This is one of my favorites. Watch him push the guard back on his butt and then make the tackle for loss. This is just an effort play, a sack that, he kind of cleaned up at the end there, but just effort play thanks to some good coverage. Shot off the line there, tackle for loss. You got to like that. And then, of course, here, this is a nice play. He beats the lineman inside and creates a tackle for loss. I don't know if that was actually a safety or not there, to be quite honest with you, but I can pull that back, the film back up there too. But what I like about him, and I saw a little bit of this, not as much with Chris Jenkins Jr., but the ability when he's engaged in a block, and he has played, you could see there, he's played a little bit over right guard and left guard, so two tech, he's done some different stuff there. But it's the shedding of the block, right? You engage in a block and just being able, and this is a must in the NFL, it's a must as a defensive lineman, being able to, once you have your arms on each other, get out of my way and move through. And even when he is double teamed, as you saw in some of those clips, he kind of fights through it and still makes a tackle, still makes a play. I don't see the 15 sack a year potential like you saw with Aaron Donald, but I see a guy that could be very disruptive, a very good supplemental player to a guy like Trey Hendrickson. I see a guy that's strong and tall and athletic. Obviously, we have to see how he tests and everything. There are some odd rumblings that aren't really founded about effort and different things about how much he likes football and that sort of thing. I don't know that any of that is truly grounded, but he's a player I really like. And I think, again, I don't think it's, super all pro potential, but I think you have a solid starter for a long time on the defensive line with this guy. Some people think, all those creative people that like to put the square peg in the round hole think, you can lean him up and play him on edge and that sort of thing. I don't really see that. I see a guy you can kind of just move around on the defensive line, namely in the interior, and have him disrupt plays pretty often.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the potential character concerns that has been kind of, trickling around of late. This guy started his career at Texas A&M. And there's some reason to believe that it may be people from Texas A&M that had some things to say about him. So then he transferred to Ole Miss. So that's why the combine is really big for him. He did an interview with the Bengals. Interviews are going to be extremely important. And that's why I think he's kind of on the fringe first round type range, because there may be some unknowns about him. But I think the Aaron Donald comparison from his words, not ours, obviously, is interesting because while he is 6'3", I do very much enjoy guys who always play consistently, below the other guy's pads. Like he rarely loses leverage, which is why compared to a guy like Derek Harmon, who's projected to be drafted around the same area, he finishes against the run a lot more consistently. He's always
look at that right there. Like look him get under like you're saying. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
It's not just leverage. I think he has a pass rush plan, which is something that Duke Tobin actually mentioned for what he looks for edge rushers, which I thought was very promising. And to not just, try to win with, converting speed to power. Obviously having a bull rush helps and it keeps offensive linemen on their toes and everything, but knowing what to do with your hands and having counters if, your first move doesn't hit, and having the get off and the athleticism to, again, spark some fear in the opposing offensive lineman. All of that combined leads to someone who can get off blocks pretty frequently, not just in the run game, but also obviously as a pass rusher. He hits a lot of marks in terms of win rate, run stop percentage, didn't miss a lot of tackles. I think at the Senior Bowl, he weighed in just under 300, like in the 295 range. So then maybe where he weighs in this week, he's not going to test, unfortunately. I think he mentioned that he needs to clean some things up, but obviously he'll test at the pro day and get some numbers in there. But athleticism testing is huge for defensive linemen, something the Bengals should definitely prioritize. But he definitely looks like an athlete on film who has quality production. He was a 5-star recruit coming out, and the Bengals have drafted a 5-star recruit pretty much every single draft since Zack Taylor has gotten here in these early rounds. Doesn't have a ton of big game experience, but he obviously played in the SEC, so he played against really high quality opponents. I would say that using all that into this argument, I would put him on right now a short list for likely targets for the Bengals with 17th overall, because we know that they're not just going to add one defensive tackle this offseason for agency. It needs to be a heavy position of need that they need to address and continue to throw investment in. And if he falls to 17 and they're okay with his character, I would say that he's someone that they're probably going to have their eyes locked in on.
Yeah, I agree with you. Depending on what happens with BJ Hill, the Bengals need to, and we've talked about this so many times, it's nauseating, but they have to find some semblance of a recreation of what they had back in 21 and 22 with DJ Reader, 21 namely, DJ Reader, BJ Hill, and Larry Ogunjobi. And let's say BJ Hill is no longer in that mix. If you have hits or somewhat of hits on McKinley Jackson, Chris Jenkins, and you bring him into the fold and he is a hit, you all of a sudden have something that looks like a pretty nice interior rotation on that defensive line. More on some things that I'm going to close the show with, but there appears to be also additional value in rounds 2 and 3 for an edge rusher, an edge defender. So let's say the Bengals get Nolan in the first. Let's say they go edge rusher in the second or third, and you don't have BJ Hill anymore, who's been a productive player, obviously, for the Bengals, but you think you can get more out of Chris Jenkins Jr. this year and McKinley Jackson this coming year. You have Nolan in the fold. Let's say you have a nice supplemental pass rusher. You keep Trey Hendrickson. All of a sudden, that defensive line looks a lot different in a good way than the past couple of years.
Yep. They need to essentially have these goals where, like, Chris Jenkins, if he's projected to be a starter, you probably didn't do enough in free agency in the draft. If Miles Murphy doesn't have some competition to be a starter on the edge opposite Trey Hendrickson, I think he kind of lacked investment there. So I think the pieces that they have right now are good to really round out the position group. And, obviously they're going to make some more moves to kind of cut some weight there. But Nolan would be, I think, a potential game changer for sure. I think there's still some things he needs to clean up. He's still really young. He only 3 years in college, but like these guys go off the board for a reason, right? Their ceiling is through the roof. And I think his floor is, higher than maybe some would give him credit for. So for a defensive line that needs to kind of rebuild and retool, I think he's a potential foundational piece for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned one of his best strengths. I mean, he sheds blocks really, really well, but that upward, that using that height and still being able to get under an offensive lineman, and none of those, if you watch those clips, none of those exemplify that more than on that left guard. I forget what team it was, but he planted him on his ass and took out the running back on that. So I am curious about how he tests at the pro day. There are a couple of smaller questions, how good is the get off and some pass rushing techniques, and like you said, some of the character stuff, which I don't know how grounded that is, but a player that I think most Bengals fans would be pretty stoked about if they picked him at number 17, especially considering how many players they need, how many things they need to retool on the defensive side of the ball. Just a solid player. And I know solid maybe isn't what you get you out of your seat at number 17, but I see a long-term NFL productive starter out of Walter Nolan.
I would 100% agree. And even if he doesn't hit that insane potential, if he's a quality starter, hit some doubles in the first round. That's the hope with the Marius Mims. Even if he isn't the Pro Bowler that Duke Tobin has now been on record for saying he could be in year 2, I think the athleticism, the upside that Mims has will give him a really good chance of being just a player that you can build around. And I think Nolan has the production and the athleticism and the tape, all three combined, to be one of their better defensive linemen that they've drafted in recent years.
Yeah. Well, let's drop the mic and get out of here. I'm going to selfishly go first just because I've got some extra stuff to do on the draft, if you're okay with that, my friend. For those who don't know, in case you don't follow my massive following on X, I laid some notes out on a recent conference call that I was on with other media members. There was an A to Z member on there, by the way, John. So kudos to your crew over there. But they, so Daniel Jeremiah shared a lot of stuff, and some of it is just kind of draft speak and that sort of thing. But one of the things I just shared was that the Bengals, because I asked him specifically about interior offensive linemen, defensive linemen, etc. But he feels that there are number one comment that really stuck out to me. I just mentioned you can get a quality edge rusher, edge defender in rounds 2 and 3. That could be a quality starter for a team. Number 2, in terms of if the Bengals don't go Walter Nolan in round number 1, he has 24 quality starting caliber defensive linemen in this draft. Last year he had 12. So this is a sweet spot draft for the Bengals on the defensive line to start things off. And as well, he didn't mention Kandra, but he felt that there are some offensive linemen in the interior that could be found rounds 3 through 5 that could help a team out and potentially right away as starters. So there are a lot of different nuggets in there. Obviously, the focus starts to go when you're talking about all teams across the board, starts to go to quarterbacks and that sort of thing. I kind of fixated on those areas there. Of course, Sawyer was a guy that was talked about quite a bit. Was it Princely? Princely is another one that could be there, a second round guy, and some other names that he popped up. But again, I was encouraged that this is a sweet spot draft. He did say this isn't the star-studded 2020 or 2024 drafts with all kinds of different quarterbacks and wide receivers and all that kind of thing that littered those classes. But this is he called it a quote starters draft. Find starters and find quality starters in this draft. It seems like the volume is there. The star power isn't so much there, but the volume for good players is in this class per Daniel Jeremiah.
My mic drop is going to be shout out to Daniel Jeremiah, who I heard was on for, I think, close to 3 hours on that call. Did you stay for all 3 hours?
Should I say yes? I didn't, but I stayed for more than half of it.
I mean, I'm just glad that our podcasts don't go beyond an hour, because I couldn't do this for another 2 hours. So he does that every single year. He is an encyclopedia of information. So shout out to DJ for doing something that I could never do.
One thing also, and I don't want to butcher the quote, but one quote he said that it was just old school mantra, but I hadn't really heard it before. Talking about this draft class was you have to go to the hardware store before the toy store. And I love that, because that is how a roster should be constructed. We know that it should be inside out. Yes, of course, there are outliers. You take a Jamar Chase instead of Penei Sewell. I don't think there was a wrong decision there, really. Anyway, but there are outliers to that. But you largely build a roster inside out, right? I mean, that's kind of the mantra, but I love that little quote, just an old school throwback type of thing, but it still rings true for the most part.
Yeah, please don't take offense to this, but that's the most Gen X thing I've ever heard in my life. We
It
don't
is.
we don't go to toy stores anymore. We go on TikTok and shop for toys, man. Like
I know. I know. I mean, I had to kind of figure out what the blue cap emoji meant. I had to go look stuff up. I'm kidding. I did know. I'm not that uncool. You goons. Anyway, John, you're the man. I appreciate you. I appreciate the time as always. I know you're ailing a little bit from your big weekend, but this was a lot of fun. This show, like last one, flew by, talking about a lot of different stuff as the offseason marches on.
Absolutely, man.
All right. Take care, everybody. We will see you soon. Subscribe to the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. Got to resubscribe to that feed to get all the shows on that podcast channel. Check out our YouTube channel. We'll be putting up all kinds of different videos. And thanks to FOCO, the fans only company. Check out all the cool stuff that they have. John, take care. Listeners, take care. We will be back soon with all kinds of different stuff on the Orange and Black Insider.